The alarm started screaming at exactly 14:32 Galactic Standard Time. Admiral Zafira dropped her hot drink and watched the blue liquid splash across her command console. In her 40 years of military service, she had never heard the deep warning sound that now filled the Imperial Fleet Command Center on Nexus Prime. "Report," she barked, her 4 eyes scanning the massive holographic displays that surrounded the command platform. Her species, the Kitherans, were known throughout the galaxy for their calm nature and strategic thinking. But right now, Zafira felt anything but calm. Lieutenant Vex, a young Trilaxian with pale green skin, turned from his sensor station. His hands were shaking as he spoke. "Admiral, something just appeared in our defense grid. Inside the safety zone. It's impossible, but it's there." Zafira moved quickly across the command center. The safety zone around Nexus Prime was the most protected space in the entire Galactic Empire. Thousands of sensor arrays watched every particle of dust that moved within 1,000,000 kilometers. Ships could only enter through 3 heavily guarded jump points, and only after providing proper codes and identification. "Show me," Zafira said, leaning over Vex's shoulder. The sensor display made no sense. A massive object had simply appeared from nothing, sitting motionless exactly 50,000 kilometers from the main fleet. The computer labeled it as unknown vessel, configuration not recognized, warning, potential threat. "How big is it?" Zafira asked. 1,200 meters long, Admiral. Mass reads as approximately 2 million tons. Zafira felt her breathing slow. That was the size of an Imperial battlecruiser. But this ship looked nothing like any vessel in the galactic databases. The hull was rough and angular, made from what appeared to be basic steel alloys. No elegant curves or flowing design like modern ships. It looked like someone had built it in a scrapyard. "Where did it come from?" she demanded. "That's the problem, Admiral," Vex said, his voice getting higher. "It didn't come from anywhere. Our sensors show no hyperspace distortion, no warp signatures, no quantum tunnel traces. 1 second there was empty space, the next second there was a ship. It violated every law of physics we know." Commander Thex, a massive Gorlak with thick armor plating covering his body, stomped over to join them. Could it be some kind of new stealth technology? Maybe it was there all along and just became visible? Zafira shook her head. Impossible. Our sensors can detect a coin-sized object at this range. This ship is huge. If it was hiding somehow, we would have seen the gravitational effects. She studied the strange vessel more carefully. The design was primitive, almost crude. No energy shields that she could detect. The weapon systems looked like simple projectile launchers, the kind of weapons that civilizations used thousands of years ago. The ship's hull was covered in what looked like armor plating, thick metal sheets welded together. "Admiral," called Operator Yix from the communications station. "We're receiving a transmission from the unknown vessel." "Put it through." The command center fell silent except for the quiet hum of computers. Then a voice spoke in heavily accented Galactic Standard. The pronunciation was rough, like the speaker had learned the language from old recordings. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth ship Defiance. We know what you did to our world." Zafira felt her blood go cold. Earth? United Earth? She had never heard of any world called Earth or any organization called United Earth. The galactic databases contained information about every known species and their homeworlds. There was no record of humans or Earth anywhere. "Unknown vessel, this is Admiral Zafira of the Imperial Fleet Command. You have entered restricted space without authorization. Identify your species and state your intentions." The response came immediately. "Our species is human. Our homeworld was Earth in what you probably called Sector 2847, and our intention is justice, Sector 2847. Zafira knew that designation, but she couldn't remember why. She gestured to Lieutenant Vex. "Search the archives for any reference to Sector 2847. "Searching now." "Admiral," Vex said, his fingers dancing across his control panel. The human captain spoke again. "We've been watching you for a long time, Admiral. We know about your fleet movements, your military bases, your supply lines. We know everything. This was getting worse by the minute. How could an unknown species have intelligence about the Empire's military operations?" Zafira activated her personal communicator and sent an emergency signal to the Imperial Security Council. This situation was beyond anything she had trained for. "Admiral," Vex said quietly, "I found something in the archives. Sector 2847 was surveyed by Imperial Survey Fleet 7 approximately 212 years ago. The report is classified at the highest levels. Access it, Zephyra ordered. I can't, Admiral. My clearance isn't high enough. But the summary says the sector contained one inhabited world with primitive sentient life. The file is marked as Operation Complete, Sector Cleared for Mining. Zephyra's stomach dropped. She knew what those words meant. The Empire had found a world with intelligent life that was too primitive to be useful. Instead of making contact or trying to uplift the species, they had simply eliminated them and taken the planet's resources. It was a dark part of Imperial policy that few people knew about. But if that was true, how were humans still alive? How had they built ships? How had they learned Galactic Standard? Captain Chen, Zephyra said into her communicator. I'm not familiar with the events you're referring to. Perhaps we can discuss this diplomatically. Would you be willing to meet with our negotiation team? The human's laughter was cold and bitter. Diplomatically? Your people murdered 5 billion of us, Admiral. Children, families, entire cities. You turned our world into ash and dust. There will be no diplomacy. Suddenly, every alarm in the command center began screaming at once. The holographic displays lit up with warnings and threat indicators. Admiral, shouted Commander Thex, the human ship is powering weapons. Shields up. Alert all vessels, Zephyra commanded. But what happened next changed everything she thought she knew about warfare. The human ship didn't fire energy beams or launch plasma torpedoes like civilized weapons. Instead, it fired simple metal projectiles, solid chunks of dense alloy, but at impossible speeds. The projectiles moved so fast they created tiny tears in space-time itself. 3 Imperial patrol cruisers that had moved to intercept the human ship suddenly went dark. Their shields had been penetrated like they weren't even there. Their hulls had holes punched completely through them. The projectiles had passed through the ship so fast that the metal had turned to plasma from the impact. How is this possible? Whispered Commander Thex. Zephyra stared at the tactical display in shock. The human ship was using kinetic weapons, chunks of metal fired at relativistic speeds. It was primitive in concept but devastating in effect. The Empire's energy shields were designed to stop plasma bolts and particle beams. They couldn't stop solid matter moving at a significant fraction of light speed. Captain Chen, Zephyra said, trying to keep her voice steady, you've made your point, but attacking Imperial vessels is an act of war. If you continue this course of action, I'll have no choice but to respond with force. The human captain's voice was calm and cold when she replied, Admiral, you declared war on humanity 200 years ago. We're just finally in a position to fight back. This isn't an attack. This is an execution. Zephyra looked around her command center at the faces of her officers. They were all staring at the displays, watching the impossible ship that had appeared from nowhere and destroyed 3 military vessels in seconds. The ship that claimed to represent a species that should have been extinct for 2 centuries. She opened a channel to the Imperial High Command on the capital world. This was beyond her authority now. This was a threat to the entire Empire. But even as she began composing her emergency report, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was already too late. The humans hadn't come to invade or conquer. They had come for something much worse. They had come for revenge. The UES Defiant sat motionless in space, its crude hull reflecting the light of Nexus Prime's star. But Zephyra could sense something terrible in that stillness. This wasn't the end of the encounter. It was just the beginning, and somewhere in the back of her mind a horrible thought was forming. If the humans could appear from nothing once, what was to stop them from doing it again? What was to stop 100 human ships from materializing throughout Imperial space? The alarms continued to scream, but now they sounded less like warnings and more like funeral songs. The Imperial High Command responded within minutes of Zephyra's emergency transmission. The main communication screen in the command center flickered to life, showing the stern face of Grand Admiral Corvin, Supreme Commander of all Imperial forces. His species, the Valdorians, were known for their logical minds and complete lack of emotion. Admiral Zephyra, Corvin's voice was as cold as space itself, explained to me how a single unknown vessel penetrated our most secure system and destroyed 3 of our ships. Zephyra straightened her uniform. Sir, the vessel appeared using technology we don't understand. They claim to be humans from a world called Earth in Sector 2847. Our archives suggest we may have encountered this species 2 centuries ago during survey operations. Corvin's 4 eyes narrowed. I'm familiar with the Sector 2847 operations. If these are survivors, they should possess only primitive technology. How are they defeating our ships? They're using kinetic weapons, sir. Solid projectiles fired at relativistic speeds. Our shields can't stop them. There was a long pause as Corvin processed this information. Very well. Implement First Contact Protocol 7. Attempt peaceful resolution while maintaining battle readiness. If diplomacy fails, you are authorized to use necessary force. The communication ended, leaving Zephyra alone with an impossible situation. First Contact Protocol 7 was designed for encountering new species, not dealing with what appeared to be survivors of an Imperial military action. But she had her orders. Lieutenant Vex, she called out, "Initiate First Contact Protocol 7. Broadcast standard greeting sequences in all known languages." The next hour was a carefully choreographed dance of attempted communication. The Empire's first contact procedures had been refined over thousands of years. They began with mathematical concepts, simple equations that any intelligent species would understand. Then they moved to basic scientific principles, followed by pictorial representations of friendship and peace. The human ship responded to none of it. "They're receiving our transmissions," reported Vex, "but they're not acknowledging any of the standard protocols, Commander." Vex lumbered over to Zephyra's command platform. "Maybe they don't understand our communication methods. If they've been isolated for 2 centuries, they might have developed differently." Zephyra nodded. "Try the historical linguistic database. Use the oldest forms of Galactic Standard we have on file." The communications team worked for another 30 minutes, broadcasting increasingly primitive versions of standard galactic languages. They tried mathematical sequences, musical patterns, even simple images projected onto the hull of nearby ships. Finally, when they had exhausted every option in the first contact procedures, the human ship responded. "We speak your language," came Captain Chen's voice, clear and unmistakable. "We've been listening to your communications for decades. We understand you perfectly." Admiral Zephyra felt frustration building in her chest. "Then why didn't you respond to our peaceful overtures?" "Because we're not here to make peace, Admiral. We're here to collect a debt." The bluntness of the statement sent a chill through the command center. This wasn't how first contact was supposed to work. New species were supposed to be curious about the galaxy, eager to learn about other civilizations, interested in trade and cultural exchange. They weren't supposed to arrive with accusations and weapons. "Captain Chen," Zephyra said carefully, "I understand you may have grievances based on historical events, but the Galactic Empire today is not the same organization it was 2 centuries ago. We've evolved. We have laws now that protect primitive species. We have protocols for peaceful contact." The human's laughter was sharp and bitter. "Protocols, laws? Tell me, Admiral, how many worlds have you surveyed in the last century? How many species have you decided were too primitive to live?" Zephyra felt her throat tighten. The truth was that the Empire's policies hadn't changed as much as she would have liked to believe. Survey fleets still cleared primitive worlds when they contained valuable resources. The legal language was more careful now, the justifications more elaborate, but the end result was the same. "I can arrange for you to speak with someone at the highest levels of government," Zephyra offered. "The Imperial Council has authority to address historical grievances and provide compensation for past actions." "Compensation?" Chen's voice rose in anger. "What could you possibly give us that would compensate for the murder of our entire species? What's the exchange rate for 5 billion dead children?" Before Zephyra could respond, her tactical officer called out urgently, "Admiral, we're detecting movement from the human vessel." On the main display, they could see the UES Defiance slowly rotating to face the Imperial fleet. Weapon ports along its hull were opening, revealing the dark muzzles of what looked like primitive cannons. "They're targeting our ships," reported the tactical officer. Zephyra opened a channel to all Imperial vessels in the system. "All ships maintain defensive positions but do not fire unless fired upon. Repeat, do not engage." She turned back to her communicator. "Captain Chen, we're trying to resolve this peacefully. Don't force us to defend ourselves. You want to see our technology, Admiral? You want to understand how we survived?" Chen's voice was calm again, but there was something terrifying in that calmness. "Let me show you what 200 years of hatred can accomplish." The human ship fired once. A single projectile, barely visible to their sensors, streaked across space toward the Imperial cruiser Starlight. The ship's captain had only enough time to send a confused transmission. What kind of weapon was that? Before the projectile struck, the Starlight didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist. The kinetic projectile, moving at nearly 30% of light speed, passed through the ship so quickly that the metal didn't have time to react. By the time the atoms realized they had been displaced, the projectile was gone. What remained was a perfectly round hole through the entire length of the cruiser, as if someone had used a massive drill. The ship's fusion reactors, suddenly exposed to space, erupted in a brilliant flash. 800 crew members died in an instant. "My God," whispered Commander Thex. Zephyra stared at the expanding cloud of debris that had once been a proud Imperial warship. The human weapon was beyond anything she had ever seen, not because it was advanced, but because it was so simple and so devastating. "Captain Chen," she said into her communicator, her voice barely steady, "you've just committed an act of war against the Galactic Empire. I'm required to respond with force." "Good," came the reply. "We were hoping you would." Suddenly, new contacts appeared on the tactical display. Not ships materializing from nothing like the Defiance had, but smaller objects moving at incredible speeds. Zephyra's sensors identified them as missiles or torpedoes, but they were unlike any she had ever seen. "Incoming projectiles," called the tactical officer. "Multiple contacts, high velocity." "Launch interceptors," Zephyra ordered. The Imperial fleet's point defense systems activated, filling space with energy beams designed to destroy incoming threats. But the human projectiles didn't behave like normal missiles. They didn't try to evade or maneuver. They simply flew straight at their targets, absorbing the defensive fire without effect. "They're not missiles," reported the tactical officer. "They're solid metal, probably tungsten or depleted uranium. Our energy weapons are just heating them up, not stopping them." The projectiles struck 3 more Imperial ships simultaneously. Each impact was perfectly placed, hitting critical systems and punching through armor like it was paper. The ships didn't explode, they simply stopped working. Life support failed, weapons went offline, engines died. "How are they targeting so precisely?" demanded Zephyra. Lieutenant Vex looked up from his sensor station, his face pale with shock. "Admiral, they're not using our targeting methods. Their weapons don't use energy guidance or computer prediction. They're just calculating trajectories manually and firing ballistic rounds. It's like they're using mathematical formulas that our countermeasures can't detect," Zephyra realized with growing horror that the humans had found a way to defeat the Empire's most advanced defenses by using the most primitive weapons imaginable. Energy shields couldn't stop solid matter. Point defense systems were designed to intercept guided missiles, not unguided projectiles. Electronic warfare was useless against weapons that didn't use electronics. "Captain Chen," Zephyra said desperately, "what do you want? What will it take for you to stop this attack?" The human's response was immediate and chilling. "We want you to remember, Admiral. Every ship we destroy, every life we take, we want you to remember that this is what your empire did to us. We want you to feel the helplessness we felt when your survey fleet turned our world into dust." Another volley of kinetic projectiles streaked across space. This time, they targeted the orbital stations around Nexus Prime, military installations that housed thousands of support personnel. The station's shields were useless against solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. "They're not just attacking military targets," reported Commander Thex. "They're going after infrastructure. This isn't a military engagement. It's terrorism." But even as he spoke, Zephyra realized he was wrong. This wasn't terrorism. Terrorism was random violence meant to create fear. This was something much more personal. The humans were targeting specific facilities. The emergency session of the Imperial High Council convened, within hours of the attack on Nexus Prime. Grand Admiral Corvin stood before the curved table, where 12 of the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat in judgment. The council chamber was a massive dome made of pure crystal, allowing the members to see the stars while they decided the fate of entire species. "The situation is unprecedented," Corvin reported, his voice echoing in the vast space. "A single unknown vessel has destroyed or disabled 17 Imperial ships and 3 orbital stations. Casualties number in the thousands." Counselor Vexstar, an ancient Etherian whose translucent body glowed with soft light, leaned forward. "You say they claim to be from Sector 2847. I was on the council when that sector was surveyed. The cleansing operation was completed successfully." "That's what our records show," Corvin agreed. "But somehow members of this species survived. They've been observing our operations for over 2 centuries, learning our technology and planning this attack." Supreme Chancellor Thalvex, the highest authority in the Empire, spoke with the voice of absolute power. What do they want? Have they made demands? No demands, Chancellor. They claim to be seeking justice for what they call the murder of their species. They appear to be motivated purely by revenge. The council members exchanged glances. Most species that encountered the Empire's military might either submitted immediately or fought briefly before being overwhelmed. The idea of a species waiting centuries for revenge was something none of them had considered. Meanwhile, in the Imperial Intelligence headquarters on the capital world of Zentara, teams of analysts were working frantically to uncover anything they could about the mysterious humans. Senior Intelligence Officer Keltash had been awake for 36 hours straight, digging through archived files that hadn't been accessed in decades. Found something, announced Junior Analyst Pix. Her excitement clear despite her exhaustion. Survey Fleet 7's detailed report on Sector 2847. It was buried in the deep archives. Keltash moved to her workstation and began reading the classified file. What he found made his blood run cold. The world had been called Earth by its inhabitants, a blue and green planet with vast oceans and continents covered in primitive cities. The dominant species called themselves humans, bipedal mammals with remarkable diversity in appearance and culture. They had achieved nuclear technology and basic spaceflight, but were still confined to their home system. Survey Fleet Commander Vorth had filed a recommendation for uplift contact, the standard procedure when encountering promising primitive species. Humans showed advanced mathematics, complex social structures, and impressive artistic achievements. They would have made excellent additions to the Empire, but Sector 2847 contained something the Empire needed more than new citizens: rare Earth elements, essential for hyperspace drive construction. The mineral deposits were located directly beneath the humans' major population centers. The decision had been made at the highest levels. Rather than relocate the humans or negotiate mining rights, the Empire had chosen the most efficient solution. Survey Fleet 7 had used orbital bombardment to eliminate all population centers, then deployed atmospheric processors to clear the remaining life. The final report estimated that 5.2 billion humans had been eliminated. The operation had been classified as a complete success, but Keltash found something in the appendices that made his hands shake. A note from one of the survey officers reported that 17 primitive spacecraft had been detected leaving the system during the bombardment. They were slow, primitive generation ships using fusion drives. The fleet commander had decided not to pursue them, noting that they lacked faster-than-light capability and posed no threat to the Empire. Keltash immediately transmitted his findings to the High Council. If humans had escaped Earth's destruction, they could have survived in interstellar space for centuries. Generation ships were designed for long journeys between stars. A species that had been forced to live in the void between worlds would have had to become very good at staying hidden. Back on Nexus Prime, Admiral Zafira was dealing with a crisis that was getting worse by the hour. The human ship hadn't moved from its position, but Imperial intelligence had detected data transmissions being sent to unknown recipients. The humans were reporting the success of their attack to someone. "Admiral," reported Lieutenant Vex, "we've been monitoring the human transmissions. We can't decode them, but we can track the destinations. They're sending signals to at least 12 different locations throughout Imperial space." Zephyra felt her stomach drop. 12 locations? Are you saying there are more human ships out there? It's possible, Admiral. The signals are being sent to coordinates near major Imperial military bases and trade routes. Before Zephyra could respond, her communications officer called out urgently. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the humans. They're broadcasting on all Imperial frequencies. Put it through." Captain Chen's voice filled the command center, but this time she wasn't speaking only to Zephyra. She was addressing the entire Imperial fleet. "Soldiers of the Empire," Chen began, her voice calm and measured. "You don't know me, but I know all of you. I know your names, your ranks, your service records. I know where you were born and where your families live. I know this because we've been watching you for over 200 years. Zephyra could see the fear in her officers' faces. The idea that an enemy had been observing them for decades without their knowledge was terrifying. Chen continued. "You've been told that you serve a noble cause, that the Empire brings order and civilization to the galaxy. But I want to tell you about a world called Terra. You probably don't know that name because your leaders prefer to use sector numbers. Terra was the third planet from a yellow star that we called Sol. On ships throughout the system, Imperial soldiers were listening to a story they had never heard before. Chen's voice carried them across space and time to a world that no longer existed. Terra was beautiful. Blue oceans, white clouds, green continents. We had built cities that reached toward the stars and art that captured the human soul. We had music and poetry and dreams of exploring the galaxy. We had 5 billion people living their lives, raising their children, hoping for the future. The transmission continued for nearly an hour. Chen told them about human culture, about their achievements and their hopes. She described the day that Imperial ships had appeared in their system, the brief moment of excitement when they thought they were meeting other intelligent life. Then she told them about the bombardment, how the orbital strikes had turned their cities to glass, how the atmospheric processors had poisoned their air and water, how they had watched their world die from the windows of escape ships that had never been meant for interstellar travel. 17 ships escaped Terra's destruction, Chen said. 17 ships carrying fewer than 1 million survivors. We weren't explorers or colonists. We were refugees fleeing the murder of our species. She described the centuries that followed, how the generation ships had wandered between stars, their population slowly declining as resources ran out, how they had survived by salvaging derelicts and raiding automated stations, how they had learned Imperial technology by studying captured equipment. We could have tried to find a new world, to rebuild our civilization, Chen continued, but we had seen what the Empire does to worlds with primitive species. We knew that as long as your government existed, no species was safe, so we made a different choice. Zephyra was beginning to understand the scope of what they were facing. The humans hadn't just survived. They had transformed themselves into something the galaxy had never seen before. A species dedicated entirely to warfare against the Empire. We spent 2 centuries preparing for this day, Chen said. We built ships designed for one purpose, destroying Imperial vessels. We studied your tactics, your technology, your weaknesses. We infiltrated your communication networks and learned your secrets. We became ghosts in the machine of your civilization. The transmission ended with words that would haunt Imperial soldiers for the rest of their lives. We are humanity. We are the children of Terra. We do not forgive, we do not forget, and we never stop hunting. Every Imperial ship that enters space from this day forward will be our target. Every Imperial base will be marked for destruction. You murdered our world, and now we will teach you what it means to be afraid. The communication ended, leaving the entire Imperial fleet in stunned silence. Admiral Zephyra looked around her command center at officers who were struggling to process what they had just heard. These weren't random terrorists or pirates. They were the survivors of an Imperial military action, and they had spent centuries preparing for revenge. "Admiral," whispered Commander Thex, "what are we going to do?" Before Zephyra could answer, every alarm in the command center began screaming again. On the tactical display, new contacts were appearing throughout the system. Not just 1 or 2, but dozens of them. Ships materializing from nowhere using the same impossible technology that had brought the Defiance. Each new contact was broadcasting the same simple message. This is humanity. Your judgment day has begun. Zephyra realized with growing horror that the attack on Nexus Prime Cepheic ships, WIT. Grand Admiral Corvin stood on the bridge of the Imperial Dreadnought Eternal Glory, the most powerful warship ever constructed by the Empire. Around him, the largest battle fleet in galactic history prepared for combat. 200 ships of the line, including 12 dreadnoughts and 50 heavy cruisers, armed with the most advanced weapons the Empire could produce. "This ends today," Corvin announced to his fleet commanders via holo communication. "One primitive ship has caused enough damage. We will overwhelm them with superior numbers and firepower." Admiral Zephyra's image flickered on the communication screen from her position aboard the heavy cruiser, Stellar Might. "Sir, I recommend caution. The human weapons are unlike anything we've encountered. Our standard tactics may not be effective." Corvin's expression showed no emotion. "Admiral, they have 1 ship. We have 200. No matter how advanced their weapons, they cannot possibly defeat us all." But even as the fleet moved into attack formation, reports were coming in from across the Empire that changed everything. Intelligence stations on 12 worlds had been destroyed by unknown attackers. Trade routes were being disrupted by ships that appeared from nowhere, struck with devastating precision, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. The humans weren't fighting like any enemy the Empire had faced before. Traditional warfare involved capturing territory, destroying enemy fleets, and forcing surrender through superior force. But the humans didn't seem interested in any of those objectives. They were simply killing Imperial personnel and destroying Imperial equipment wherever they found it. Commander Yeklos, the fleet's tactical officer, studied the sensor readings from the human ship. "Sir, their vessel appears to be moving into the asteroid field at the edge of the system. They may be trying to use the asteroids for cover." Corvin nodded. "Standard pursuit formation. We'll flush them out and destroy them in open space where our numbers advantage is decisive." The Imperial fleet moved toward the asteroid field like a vast metal storm. Their sensors could easily track the human ship among the floating rocks. The UES Defiance was moving slowly, seemingly unable to outrun the faster Imperial vessels. "We have them trapped," reported Yeklos. "They're heading toward the dense part of the field. Once we surround them, they'll have nowhere to run." But Admiral Zephyra was studying her tactical display with growing unease. Something about the human ship's movement patterns bothered her. They weren't running randomly or desperately. They were following a specific course, almost as if they were leading the Imperial fleet somewhere. "Sir," she called to Corvin, "I think this might be a trap." Before Corvin could respond, the first explosions lit up the asteroid field. Imperial ships began reporting damage from unknown sources. Not from the human ship, which was still visible on sensors, but from the asteroids themselves. "Nuclear mines," shouted Commander Yeklos. "The asteroids are rigged with nuclear explosives." Corvin stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The humans had somehow placed thousands of nuclear devices throughout the asteroid field. As Imperial ships passed by the floating rocks, proximity sensors triggered devastating explosions that tore through hulls and disabled systems. "How is this possible?" Corvin demanded. "When did they have time to mine an entire asteroid field?" Admiral Zephyra's voice came through the communication system, tight with fear. "Sir, intelligence reports suggest the humans have been operating in Imperial space for decades. They could have been preparing this ambush for years." The UES Defiance suddenly changed course, moving not away from the Imperial fleet, but directly toward them. Their crude-looking ship accelerated to impossible speeds, far faster than any vessel its size should have been able to move. "All ships, fire at will," Corvin ordered. 200 Imperial warships opened fire simultaneously. Energy beams and plasma bolts filled space with deadly light, but the human ship moved through the barrage like it was flying through empty space. Their primitive-looking hull absorbed direct hits from weapons that should have vaporized it. "Their armor is some kind of composite we've never seen before," reported Yeklos. "It's absorbing our energy weapons and dispersing the heat. Our most powerful guns are barely scorching their hull." Then the humans began their own attack, and Admiral Zephyra realized that everything they thought they knew about the enemy was wrong. The Defiance didn't just fire kinetic projectiles. It launched what appeared to be small spacecraft, tiny one-person fighters that moved with suicidal determination toward Imperial ships. "Fighters incoming," called the tactical officer aboard Zephyra's ship. "But these readings are impossible. There are no life signs aboard the attacking craft." Zephyra watched in horror as the human fighters ignored all defensive fire and rammed directly into Imperial vessels. Each impact created a nuclear explosion that punched through the strongest armor plating. The pilots were using their own ships as guided nuclear missiles. "How can they sacrifice their people like this?" whispered her communications officer. But as Zephyra studied the sensor data more carefully, she realized something even more terrifying. The attacking fighters weren't carrying living pilots. They were being controlled by artificial intelligence systems, but not normal AI. The computer signatures were unlike anything in Imperial databases. "Admiral," called her science officer, "I'm detecting strange patterns in the enemy AI systems. The computer cores appear to be based on organic neural patterns. It's almost as if they're using human brain structures as the basis for their AI." Zephyra felt her blood turn to ice. The humans weren't just using artificial intelligence to pilot their suicide fighters. They were using the consciousness patterns of their own dead. The fighters were being piloted by human minds that had been uploaded into computer systems. The implications were staggering. If humans could transfer their consciousness into machines, then death didn't mean the same thing to them as it did to other species. Every human who died could potentially become a weapon against the Empire. "Sir," she called to Grand Admiral Corvin, "we need to retreat. The enemy capabilities are beyond what we anticipated. But Corvin's flagship was under direct attack. The UES Defiance had closed to point-blank range and was systematically destroying the Eternal Glory's weapon systems with precisely aimed kinetic rounds. Each shot was perfectly placed to disable specific systems without destroying the ship entirely. "They're not trying to kill us," Corvin reported, his voice filled with confusion. "They're disabling our weapons but leaving life support intact." Captain Chen's voice came through the communication system, addressing the entire Imperial fleet. "Grand Admiral, you're wondering why we're not destroying your ships outright. It's because we want you to live. We want you to go back to your empire and tell them what you've seen here. We want them to know that their most powerful fleet was defeated by a single human ship and a few dozen fighters." The truth of her words was undeniable. In less than 2 hours, the largest battle fleet in Imperial history had been reduced to a collection of disabled vessels drifting helplessly in space. The human ship had used the mined asteroid field to break up the Imperial formation, then systematically disabled every major warship using a combination of kinetic weapons and suicide attacks. "But this is just the beginning," Chen continued. "Right now, human ships are attacking Imperial installations across the galaxy. Your trade routes are being cut. Your supply bases are being destroyed. Your communication networks are being infiltrated." As if to confirm her words, reports began flooding in from across the Empire. Military bases on 17 worlds were under attack. Cargo ships were being destroyed in transit. Even the heavily fortified Imperial Academy on Zentara was reporting enemy action. Admiral Zephyra realized with growing horror that the humans had planned this perfectly. While the Empire had been focused on the single ship at Nexus Prime, human forces had been positioning themselves throughout Imperial space. The attack on the battle fleet wasn't the main operation, it was a distraction. "How many ships do you have?" Corvin asked, his voice barely audible. Chen's laughter was cold and bitter. "How many Imperial ships have you built over the past 2 centuries, Grand Admiral? How many derelicts have you left floating in space after battles? How much salvage has gone unclaimed in the outer systems?" The implication hit Zephyr like a physical blow. The humans hadn't built their fleet from scratch. They had been salvaging Imperial technology for decades, converting captured ships and building new vessels from stolen materials. Every ship the Empire had lost or abandoned had potentially become a weapon in human hands. "We've been preparing for this war longer than any of your officers have been alive," Chen said. "We've studied every Imperial ship design, every tactical manual, every strategic doctrine. We know your weaknesses better than you do." On the tactical display, Zephyra could see the human fighters regrouping around the Defiance, but now she noticed something that made her blood run cold. There were more fighters than had been launched from the human ship. New ones were arriving from somewhere else, appearing from the same quantum nowhere that the Defiance had emerged from. "Reinforcements?" whispered her tactical officer. "No," Zephyra said quietly. "Replacements. Every fighter that was destroyed in the attack has been replaced by an identical vessel." "They're not reinforcing their forces. They're replenishing." 6 months after the disaster at Nexus Prime, Admiral Zephyra stood in the ruins of what had once been the Imperial Communications Hub on Kepler Station. The massive facility that had coordinated military operations across half the galaxy was now a twisted mass of metal and melted rock. The human attack had been swift, precise, and absolutely devastating. "Casualty report," she said quietly to her aide, Lieutenant Vex, who had somehow survived the destruction of 3 different ships during the ongoing war. 4,000 dead, Admiral. 7,000 wounded. The quantum communication array is completely destroyed. It will take years to rebuild." Vex's voice was hollow, drained of emotion by months of constant defeat. Zephyra nodded grimly. This was the 47th major Imperial installation that had been destroyed since the humans had revealed themselves. Each attack followed the same pattern. Ships appearing from nowhere, striking with impossible precision, and vanishing before Imperial forces could respond. But today was different. Today they had finally captured something. In the secure holding bay of her ship, Imperial scientists were examining the wreckage of a human fighter that had been damaged during the attack. For the first time, they had a chance to study human technology up close. Dr. Kelvash, the Empire's leading expert on xenobiology, met Zephyra at the entrance to the laboratory. His normally calm demeanor was shaken, his hands trembling as he led her to the examination chamber. "Admiral, What we found inside this fighter challenges everything we understand about consciousness and death, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The human fighter was smaller than Imperial designs, built for a single pilot with no consideration for comfort or safety. But what drew Zephyra's attention was the pilot chamber itself. Instead of a cockpit designed for a living being, the fighter contained a spherical device covered in complex neural interfaces. It's a consciousness storage unit, Dr. Kelvash explained. The humans have found a way to transfer a living mind into a quantum computer system. The pilot of this fighter has been dead for over a century, but their consciousness continues to exist inside this device. Zephyra studied the alien technology with growing horror. You're saying they're using the minds of their dead as pilots? Not just pilots, Admiral. We've detected similar systems in the wreckage of larger human ships. Their entire military appears to be staffed by uploaded consciousness. They've found a way to make death temporary. The implications were staggering. If humans could transfer their minds into machines, then every person who had died over the past 2 centuries could potentially be brought back to fight against the Empire. The 17 ships that had escaped Earth's destruction could have carried millions of consciousness patterns stored in computer systems. There's more, Dr. Kelvash continued, leading her to another section of the laboratory. We've been analyzing the quantum signatures from their transportation technology. We think we know how they're able to appear from nowhere. The scientist activated a holographic display showing complex mathematical equations. They're not using hyperspace or any conventional faster-than-light travel. They're using quantum tunneling on a massive scale. Essentially, they're moving through the spaces between atoms, traveling through quantum foam itself. Zephyra stared at the display. That should be impossible. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical. Under normal circumstances, yes. But the humans aren't using normal matter for their ships. They're using a combination of regular materials and exotic matter, created in the vacuum between stars. Their ships exist partially in normal space and partially in quantum space. That's why our sensors have trouble detecting them, and why our weapons are less effective. Before Zephyra could ask more questions, her communication device chimed with an emergency signal. The call was from Grand Admiral Corvin, and his normally emotionless face showed signs of strain that Zephyra had never seen before. Admiral, we need to talk immediately. Something has happened that changes everything. Within hours, Zephyra was aboard Corvin's flagship, sitting in a secure briefing room with the Empire's highest military leaders. The mood was somber, filled with the weight of impending disaster. The humans have escalated their operations, Corvin began without preamble. 3 hours ago, they attacked the Imperial Academy on Zentara. But this wasn't like their previous strikes. They didn't destroy the facility. They captured it. Zephyra felt her blood run cold. The Imperial Academy was where the Empire trained its future officers and stored its most sensitive military information. If the humans had captured it intact, they would have access to decades of strategic planning and classified research. What about the students and faculty? She asked. That's where it gets complicated, Corvin said, activating a holographic display. The humans didn't kill anyone. They used some kind of neural disruption weapon that rendered everyone unconscious. When our forces arrived, they found all personnel alive but unharmed. However, the humans had downloaded the entire Academy database. The display showed hundreds of human ships surrounding the Academy complex. But these weren't crude vessels like the Defiance. These ships were sleek, advanced designs that incorporated both human and Imperial technology. They're evolving, Zephyra realized. They started with primitive ships built from salvage, but they're learning from every engagement. They're improving their technology faster than we can adapt to their tactics. Corvin nodded grimly. Intelligence estimates that they now have access to our complete military database. Ship designs, fleet movements, defense protocols, officer training manuals, everything. But the worst was yet to come. As the briefing continued, reports began arriving from across the Empire that painted a picture of complete strategic collapse. Human ships were appearing simultaneously at dozens of locations, striking with perfect coordination and timing. The attack on the Academy hadn't been random. It was the signal for a galaxy-wide offensive that the humans had been planning for months. While the Empire had been focused on defending individual targets, the humans had been positioning forces throughout Imperial space. Sir, called Communications Officer Lix from her station, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They're broadcasting on all Imperial frequencies. Put it through, Corvin ordered. Captain Chen's voice filled the briefing room, but she wasn't alone. Multiple human voices spoke in unison, creating a chorus that was both beautiful and terrifying. "People of the Galactic Empire," they said, "we are the children of Terra. We are the survivors of your genocide. We are the dead who have returned to claim justice." The transmission showed images of Earth before its destruction. Vast cities, green forests, blue oceans. Then it showed the bombardment, the orbital strikes that had turned a living world into ash and slag. "You murdered 5 billion of us," the chorus continued. "You destroyed our world, our culture, our future. You thought you had eliminated us completely, but we survived. We adapted. We became something you never expected." The images changed to show the human generation ships fleeing through space, their populations slowly dying as resources ran out. But then the story took an unexpected turn. The ships hadn't been searching for a new world to colonize. They had been searching for a way to transform themselves into something that could never be destroyed. We learned to transfer our consciousness into quantum storage systems. We learned to exist in the spaces between atoms. We became beings of pure thought, housed in bodies of exotic matter. Death became temporary. Destruction became inconvenience. The transmission showed human ships materializing throughout Imperial space. Not dozens or hundreds, but thousands. Ship after ship appearing from quantum foam, each one carrying the consciousness of humans who had died centuries ago, but who had never stopped planning their revenge. "We are no longer bound by the limitations of biological life," the chorus said. "We do not age. We do not tire. We do not forget. And we never forgive." Admiral Zafira realized with growing horror that the Empire was facing an enemy unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The humans had transformed themselves into a species that existed partially outside normal space-time. They could appear anywhere, strike with perfect precision, and disappear before retaliation was possible. "What do you want?" Corvin asked, his voice barely audible. The human response was immediate and final. "We want the Empire to understand what it means to be hunted to extinction. Every world you colonized while our people died in space. Every species you uplifted while you murdered ours. Every achievement you celebrated while our civilization lay in ruins. All of it will be taken from you piece by piece until nothing remains." The transmission showed images of Imperial worlds under attack. Not random destruction, but careful, systematic dismantling of everything the Empire had built. Human ships were targeting infrastructure, communication networks, supply chains. Everything needed to maintain a galactic civilization. "This is not conquest," the chorus continued. "This is justice. We are not here to rule your territories or enslave your populations. We are here to teach you the lesson you taught us, that some actions cannot be forgiven, and some debts cannot be repaid." The communication ended with words that would echo through Imperial space for generations to come.